Nowadays, many people form an opinion on the everyday life and traditions of the Ottoman Empire, based on colorful and professionally filmed movies. Good and noble sultans, beautiful harem concubines, justice and prosperity pretty much everywhere. But in reality it is not, and not even like that at all. Behind the festive silk of wealth and luxury were often not just ugly, but gruesome things that even today it is not appropriate to talk about. Welcome to Flip Side of History, the other side of the known world history. The topic of today's video is dirty secrets of the Ottoman Empire. So, let's begin. Successors to the throne. This is one of the most dreadful traditions of the Ottoman Empire, which existed until 1671 officially, while no one among historians can give the unofficial time of action concretely. According to the traditions of succession, the throne did not necessarily pass to the eldest son. It could be taken by any of the legitimate offspring. It was therefore to avoid palace revolts that every sultan who ascended the throne killed all his brothers by blood. And this tradition was introduced by Mehmed II the Conqueror, who conquered Constantinople and was actively promoted by modern cinema. Although the fact is that on the side of the Byzantine king, against Mehmed was his own uncle. In the end, after the fall of the city, the Sultan issued a law that read, "And whoever of my sons leads the Sultanate must kill his brothers. Most of the ulema do this as it is, so let them continue to do so." By the way, the same Suleiman the Magnificent, almost an icon of progressiveness, calmly watched from behind a screen as his own son was strangled, because the young man became very popular among the troops, and the fathers strongly feared to be overthrown from the throne. Since 1617, as we already mentioned, the tradition of mass murder was abolished by decree of Sultan Ahmed. Though he replaced the death penalty with life in a cage, it is not clear what was worse, a quick death or endless stagnation in the status of a pet. The pet, of course, was fed, taken out for a walk, and even supplied with girls, with their ovaries cut out beforehand, so as not to conceive an inheritor. But this didn't make it easier for the inmate. Many obviously went insane. Some got extremely drunk, and some even turned to heavy drugs. The descendants born of concubines were called Shahzadeh. They were soon placed in cages, by the way, almost from birth. In order to prevent these same Shahzadehs from procreating, just like the women who were served, they also underwent surgeries to protect them from possible conception. In this respect, many historians describe the luxurious living conditions of the heirs to the throne, forgetting to say that it was often a cage, despite the fact that it was a golden cage. Harem Legends. The official accounts state that concubines in the harem were engaged in constant training, beautifying and enjoying the intimacy of their bodies with the adored sultan. The word odalisque has even entered the European vocabulary, a synonym for beautiful and enchanting ladies. In fact, odalisques were common servants at the lowest level of the harem hierarchy and were not considered human beings in any way. When life conditions of concubines are described, a lot of times all the attention is devoted to luxury, plentiful food, and other delights. It is true that it is somehow forgotten that in the pre-Suleiman era, the average life of a concubine in the harem did not exceed 2 years. And the reason for that was not only executions for faults, but just the banal spread of infections in the isolated space. It is not a surprise to many that girls from poor strata were often taken to harems. And there was more than enough poverty in the Ottoman streets. Therefore, the concubines were often carriers of bacillus, which in conditions of moisture and lack of heating led to a wide and rapid spread of the tuberculosis in the harem. Husband's attention to concubines. Well, surely, the lucky women to whom the Sultan bestowed his attention were in a whole other scale of existence. Again, according to the movies and popular literature, the Sultan would go and look for his own partner for the night, or bring in the one who had somehow managed to catch his eye. But in reality, the struggle for a night with the Sultan was, in modern terms, outright corruption. The wives as well as concubines who had money bribed the Sultan's confidants, promising them unimaginable benefits in case the successor ascended the throne. In modern language, women from the harem were promoted by the closest political assistant, who selected concubines for the harem and psychologically treated them, by the head of the security service and other concerned individuals. In other words, the harem was a bundle of snakes, each of which sought to become the main one. So it is no surprise that most of the girls in the harem could not even look at their beloved spouse once, So besides waiting for intimacy with the Sultan, the poor women found other ways to entertain themselves and satisfy their own desires. Some of them managed to get wine and drown their longing in alcohol, but for the most part, the girls found ways to get satisfaction from the eunuchs, odd as it may sound. There were actually three categories of eunuchs. The first, the sandals, were deprived of all male characteristics. The second, the spadens, had no, bulbs, which were simply pulled out. Finally, the third category, the tlibia, were probably the most miserable because the bulbs and the stem were chopped off. In spite of this, eunuchs in the second and third categories were able to enjoy themselves for quite a long time, and many concubines so perfected their excitement skills that they were able to get aroused even a sandal. And people were probably so desperate that no one was frightened that if such an affair was disclosed, the concubine would face a bald sack and the last dive into the Bosphorus, while the eunuch would be banished in the best-case scenario. There are many documented cases when a concubine, released from the harem with acquittal allowance, was given in marriage and then demanded a divorce. The reason was that a wholesome, healthy husband was not able to give his spouse the pleasure that a eunuch could provide. And there were eunuchs who not only satisfied the concubines, but also bought their own ladies. Harem eunuchs, which is, by the way, unbelievable at all, actively used various drugs to stimulate sexual desire. In addition, they were possibly the world's first suppliers to the harem of a wide variety of adult toys. In general, the female gender could get anything they wanted if they wanted it. Finally, the skill of the eunuchs was so perfect that there were legends about it in the same city of Istanbul, where one was more incredible than the other. Cleanings and penalties. This subject was tried not to be raised by anyone at all. Each sultan periodically conducted a cleansing of the apparatus, as well as passing death sentences when petitioners gathered outside his palace. The role of executioners was played by ordinary gardeners, who in between planting flowers quite professionally chopped the heads. But the royalty and the top brass were entitled to only one capital punishment, strangulation. So the main gardener was always huge and muscular, capable of strangling anyone with a thin cord. For a condemned to death, such as a vizier, there was a possibility of avoiding death if the unfortunate person won the running contest. The idea was simple. If the gardener brought out a white sherbet in his hands, the condemned man understood that he had been given a respite. If red, he simply had to run. The task was to run through the garden mazes to the opposite side of the palace before the gardener did. If the vizier made it in time, he was simply exiled. But as a rule, an elderly man could not compete in running with a young and healthy gardener, who, more often than not, was already waiting at the gate for his gasping victim with a smirk. The blood tax. It is no hidden fact that the Ottoman Empire imposed a so-called blood tax on enslaved peoples. Young boys were taken from their parents and taken to Istanbul under escort. This was a preliminary stage of selection. Those who died on the way were considered a weak asset, so only those who could take the place of a warrior or dignitary in the future reached the capital. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to Flip Side of History and do not hesitate to leave a like. Also watch our other videos.